I'm Rachel Horgan. Join me each episode as I sit down with a guest co-host covering the latest business stories in the Seattle area. We'll read the news so you don't have to. This is The Weekly. Hey everybody, Rachel here. And some people are asking, is it The Weekly or The Weekly Seattle? And it's kind of both. That was partly for SEO reasons. For when people search, you'll kind of see it listed both ways. And it was easier to get the website, The Weekly Seattle. I wanted it to be included. The other reason is if things blow up and get big, you could have The Weekly Denver and The Weekly San Francisco. So anyway, some people were asking about that, so I wanted to clear it up. And today I'm sitting here at the World Trade Center again. Thank you again to Allison Scott for allowing us to sit here. I'm with Amber Simonsen. Hello.
Hello.
Amber is the Commercial Portfolio Director at Alaska Airlines and also the founder of A Better 40, which aims to make your work life work. And a little bit more about you. You've been at Alaska for almost 12 years, and prior to that worked in project management at Pierce Transit and Tyler Technologies. So you've had a long history of project management and telling people what to do.
Well, and getting things done. I think that's the thing that lights me up. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. So just this episode's going to be a little bit different. I'm trying new things. I am going to give you kind of two pieces of news stories that I had to mention on this episode. But most of today's episode, we're going to kind of dive into overwhelm and burnout and stress and, you know, not everybody can just quit their jobs and go sit on an island. You know, a lot of Amber's work has been helping people be a little bit more efficient at work, set some boundaries at work. So we're going to have a bigger discussion about that. And if you like this kind of format, maybe we'll do a few more of these kind of deep dives into different kind of topics. But I felt like no matter whether you are working, you know, at a bar or at a desk job or remote or whatever, I think some of these tips are really going to apply, don't you think?
Yes, absolutely. I think whether you're hybrid or not, these are the kind of tips that you can put into practice and really see improvement in how your work life works so that you can live that fuller life when you get home. Yeah,
definitely. Okay, so before we dive into that discussion, I do just want to let you know about two pieces of news. I have to let you know if you're listening to the podcast, and, you know, I don't want you to sound silly and not knowing what's going on in the business community. So the first one is Tamara Murphy. She passed away. She was the chef and co-owner of Terra Plata. She was 63 years old and suffered a stroke. She won a James Beard Award and just was heavily involved in the community. It's kind of weird timing because the last episode, if you remember, we were talking about minimum wage in the restaurant industry. And I had actually reached out to her to get a comment, and she didn't respond, which obviously, but it kind of seemed weird to me because I interviewed her on stage. I've seen her at networking events. And so it's just kind of a weird timing on that. So yeah, my heart goes out to her and her family. And yeah, I'll link the article to her at Seattle Times that did a write-up on that. The other piece of news that we have to mention is that Starbucks has a new CEO. So it was this guy, Laxman, and he hasn't been there very long. I think 2023 he started. So this is going to be the fourth CEO in 6 years. The new one's going to be the Chipotle CEO, Brian Niccol. He's credited with kind of turning Chipotle around. I was a little surprised by this because there is this viral video. Have you seen it, Amber, of him talking about like the portions at Chipotle?
Yes.
You have?
It's so funny.
It's so cringe because he was like, oh no, our portions are fine. All you have to do is kind of give our guys and women a little wink and you'll get more. Like what?
No, I don't think so.
So
I've tried that for guac for years. It doesn't work.
Yeah, it doesn't work.
No.
I know. Well, hopefully that was just a weird video and I don't know. But he basically negotiated this huge pay of $113 million package. And then a lot of the other headlines are saying the hypocrisy of how he is able to work remote. He negotiated being able to work remote in Newport Beach, California. But his employees have to come in 3 days a week, which, you know, we know CEOs' lifestyles. They're traveling around, they're flying around. They're not really in the office a lot. But I think the optics on this aren't good, right?
They're not good. And I think you really do need that chance to connect with others. It doesn't have to be every day. That's why I think the hybrid environment really works. As long as when you are in person, you're taking that time to connect with your employees, connect with just people at large, especially as a CEO. Mm-hmm. You want to make sure folks know what you're trying to do with the company so that when new direction comes out, you actually know. And I really appreciate that about the leaders I've worked with is that presence is super important. And you can be not present and still in the office too. Yeah. If all you do is go in your office and share your door. So I'm interested to see if that remote workplace, maybe he's getting on a plane every week, which I'm sure Alaska, we'd love to fly him up from there every week. But I think presence means a lot to staff, especially in that corporate environment as he's driving his direction and strategy.
Yeah, it's not a good look to start out as the new CEO doing that. There's a great podcast called Seattle Now. Joey Thompson, a reporter for Puget Sound Business Journal, talks about how their strategy has gone away from the third place model, and they just want to make everything faster and more efficient, changing the way they serve their ice, all that kind of stuff. So check that out if you want to dive a little bit more into it. But the headline is that Starbucks has a new CEO. It's the Chipotle CEO, Brian Niccol. Okay, let's get into a better 40. Yes. I'm so excited. Okay, so let's start with kind of defining what is overwhelm versus burnout. And I think that overwhelm eventually leads to burnout, but kind of, can you talk a little bit more about like the differences that you see and kind of how we get to burnout?
Sure. When I think about overwhelm, it actually goes back to that old shipping term that comes from overwhelm is when water starts to come over the bow of the boat. And that can be a really scary situation unless you're just moving through the water and it's coming over and it's splashing out. But as it starts to load up, you start to feel like you're sinking. And overwhelm by definition is too much. And so when I think of overwhelm in the workplace, that's either too much work in terms of volume, it's too much stress, it's too much pressure, it's not being able to feel like you can come up above that water, still using the water term. What's interesting, though, is when you combine that with scarcity. Scarcity is about not having enough. And it's so interesting. There was a study done by Dr. Dan Brennan, and he actually talked about the impact of scarcity mindset. It actually lowers your IQ by 14 points on average when they did the study, which is crazy because I need all the IQ points I can get. And so if I'm constantly living in this state, if I don't have enough time, and you combine that with overwhelm as I have too much to do, it creates a tension where you actually feel stuck. And that stuck feeling, if not addressed, is going to spiral you towards burnout. And there's lots of folks that have talked about burnout, over the years, lots of great resources out there. But I think the thing I want to make sure folks understand is when you start to feel that overwhelmed feeling, it's a signal. It's a signal that
your
you
body
need.
telling us something. Yeah,
exactly. And you actually have to get a plan in place in order to get out of it. You can't ignore it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, again, a lot of people can't just quit their jobs. So sometimes I think it's the system and the organization that doesn't set you up for success. So like sometimes, yes, it's your own expectations of yourself and your own high achieving net stuff that I think we probably both have. But sometimes the system just, there's too many events for me, and in particular in my situation. There's not enough staff to help you. There's not enough resources. And then, I guess, what do we do in that situation?
Yeah, when we don't have what we need in order to get our job done, that's when I encourage folks, either my team or people that I'm working with, is that you've got to make your work visible. And there's a few different ways to do it. One is to just talk about what you're getting done, what you're accomplishing, what you're working on, and be transparent about issues that you're having. I think too often, and I see this especially with women, we tend to just put our heads down and get her done. Like, we'll just work harder. We'll work all night. We'll work all weekend just because it's important to get it done. But we won't say anything about it and we won't complain. And I think it's super important that as we work together and we are in the office, it's okay to mention that, hey, I put in a lot of time this weekend, but I'm going to need some help next week. I can't keep this going. And sometimes it's just a matter of awareness. People didn't know. And one of my favorite ways to make work visible, if you are not in an environment where you can just mention something to a boss or a coworker or a team, is to use like a virtual Kanban board and make sure that's something that you're
I'm not familiar with that.
These are my favorite. So this is a way where you pull together all of the work that you're doing and putting it in live version, like a tangible version, you're using sticky notes. In a virtual version, you're using little cards. You can do it in Teams, Trello. A lot of people use this, where you're stacking up all the work you need to do, what the work you're working on, where you need help or you're waiting for something, and then what's done. And with a quick glance, you can tell when someone is really just overloaded versus, hey, maybe they have capacity for a new project.
Yeah.
And I find that's just an easy way to have that conversation without having to have, you don't ever want to be perceived as complaining. I think that's the other thing. And some people do go that route. And while we all say the squeaky wheel gets the grease, I also think the high performer gets the help.
The high performer gets help. Yeah, because I was kind of talking about how, listen, I just don't think very many companies are going to be like, you know what, let's spend more money on this person over here. Let's just give them money, even though they're doing great work at the rate that we're paying them. Sure, some companies do that. I get it. But like, and some people are really nice. But overall, a company's not going to spend more money if you're doing the work and not saying anything about it. So that's what he's sort of talking about. Like, okay, well, is the solution to go complain and say like, hey, I can't do this with this, without these resources or whatever. But I like your kind of reframe of, sure, maybe that works in some situations, but also, hey, this is what I've been doing. And this is why I need more resources to do better or to, or more pay or whatever, right?
Yes, absolutely. I think part of it is you being objective about it too. Step back and think about your audience. If you're trying to pitch something to your boss, I remember a number of years I was leading some work and it was getting very complex and very complicated. And we really need somebody to kind of oversee like an entire portfolio of work. And I remember sitting down with my boss and kind of just laying it out visually to show like, here's all the responsibilities, here's the duties, here's what's happening. And this is the piece that's missing. And together we were able to get to a point where, what we really need is we need somebody leading across all these areas. And what started out for me, earlier in my career is just pitching something. They really saw as you've just provided me a solution to the problem I wasn't even quite sure I knew how to define, which is great. And it was great for all of us. So I ended up taking that role once it was defined.
Yeah. So kind of coming to your boss and saying, like, what if we hire a contract worker? What if we hire a temp person or whatever that may be? Yeah. That's good advice. So sometimes it's, like I said, the situation that you're in, but sometimes I know some coworkers that are just always stressed. And I'm like, do you need to be that stressed about it? Like, I feel like no matter what job they're in, no matter what role they're in, they push themselves to this hyper stressed situation. And sometimes it's valid. And sometimes I'm like, girl, that could have wait till tomorrow,
Right.
So I guess how does that come about? Like, why are some people kind of wired that way?
It's interesting because I think part of it goes back to how you measure your own productivity. And some of these are false proxies, like how long you work, how many emails you send. Like that's not going to actually produce necessarily the results that you're trying to achieve. And so I think as high achievers, and I know all of your audience are high achievers, we are wired to be perceptive to what works in the workplace. And many of us very early in our careers kind of understood these expectations. They weren't blatantly said, and I call them whispered expectations.
Whispered expectations. Okay.
Yes.
More.
So think back to when you get asked to maybe create a PowerPoint presentation for an executive. And I remember this is way back when it was like my first corporate job. They asked for it on a Friday. And I just assumed that they would want it Monday morning. And so I spent all weekend long, at my computer. PowerPoint was brand new at this time. Now I sound old, but I knew how to use it. And so I put together this PowerPoint, gave it to the executive Monday morning, and they were blown away. Like they just gushed. I cannot believe this is fantastic. Before they were going to do it like on overhead acetates. And I didn't know how to make those back then. So that's why I decided.
Like back in the day when we were writing and the light shined onto the wall?
That's what they were. That's what he thought I was going to do. But I'm like, I know how to use this new thing. And so I'm going to do that instead. And from that point on, I just internally kind of listened to this whispered expectation of when you're given an assignment, you better turn it right away. Instead of going back, and now what I do, because that only works when you're in your 20s and you have no life. And I think all of us realize it's good to spend time with our dogs after work. It's good to spend time with our kids, our spouses, our friends, and also on our own health. And I think those are the things that we're sacrificing when we look to being over responsive, or to your point, just creating churn around things that makes you feel good because you feel busy and intense, but it's not actually helping the end result.
And leadership is kind of encouraging that, right? Of like, hey, like, they were saying good job, but they may continue to ask you that same turnaround because you did it once, so you can do it again. So it kind of takes both you as the employee to set boundaries, but also if you're a leader to say, thanks for doing it over the weekend, but like you really didn't have to, and I won't, make you do that again, or whatever that is, right?
Absolutely. I think with whispered expectations, there's actually something for both the employee, but also for the leader. And so when I speak to leaders of people, that's one of the really important points is you have to own your communication of expectations to your team. And I have screwed this up as a leader. I remember I had an employee who was spending a lot of time managing a group inbox, like just a lot of time.
A group inbox, so that's like events at XYZ company.
Yeah, some
or
generic
sales
name.
at XYZ company.
Exactly. And so they've got the potential to be getting, anywhere between 20 and 100 emails plus a day. And every time one came in, they were answering it. And it was really distracting them from the rest of their work. And as we started chatting, because she looked worn out. And, as leaders, we can see that in our people. It's like, what's going on? And, I've just got so much going on. And I really thought the workload was reasonable. So that's what I was like, well, tell me more. And finally, we got around to this group inbox. And I said, why are you responding the same day? And she just, I thought I was supposed to. I want to, I want to be responsive to folks. And I'm like, oh my gosh. I'm like, this is my fault. Because my expectation was like every 24 hours, every 48 hours. And by then moving it, so she just took a 1 hour block a day. And that was her answering time. She kicked through all of them in 30 minutes.
Wow.
Most days. Yeah, just done. And it was huge. It was huge for her. But it was also a fantastic lesson for me as a leader that I just need to be specific. I should never expect people to read my mind.
Yeah. No, that's very true. I think there's a lot of places and companies that people are doing something they don't necessarily need to do or have to do, especially when they're feeling overwhelmed. Definitely. So how can companies actually help with wellness? That's not just, I've been at many companies that obviously are giving the pizza party. They're like, hey, here's a free subscription to the Calm app. And I also feel like there's some leaders that are like, hey, you get a free day off, or why don't you take Friday off? And I remember being so frustrated by that because I'm like, that doesn't help me. Like, if I take Friday off, I still have to go, this event still has to happen. So you're not really helping me out here, So I guess, do you have any thoughts on what companies can actually do?
I think the number one tip that we all need, especially with some folks being hybrid, it doesn't really matter your culture, is we have lost the art of transition time. And when you think about what transition time is, it's that time between meetings, number one, but also just going from the topic that you're on into something else. What our corporate culture has done is if a meeting ends at, let's say, 10 a.m., you're going to run that meeting all the way up until 10 o'clock. And then everyone in there, if they have a new meeting coming, you're going to be late or you're just going to be rushed and you won't have processed anything that you thought of, let alone taking care of own personal needs, grabbing a glass of water or something like that. And so I know one of the things that we've been doing kind of in my microcosm at Alaska has been everything ends at 5 till. We're really purposeful about it. Anything that I'm leading or my team's leading. And you can see that start to spread. And it's really powerful because it gives folks that chance to come into whatever's next feeling refreshed.
Yeah. I was at a company once where we looked at every single meeting that we were doing and we asked, do we need to be having this meeting? Does it still need to be weekly? Can it be bi-weekly? Are the right people in this meeting? Can it be 30 minutes? All of that kind of stuff. And we ended up getting rid of quite a few.
That's great.
So
I think that's a really helpful practice and something that it was funny. I was talking with someone the other day and they were saying, I wish my HR department would do X. I was like, why don't you? As a leader of a department or division, you have the power to kind of set that tone. When you start a meeting, whether you make an agenda, and I'm a huge proponent of agendas. I feel like if you don't have an agenda, you shouldn't have a meeting, right?
Preach.
Yep. And so when you program that specifically, like you're going to end at 5 till, everybody's on the same page. And you can start to spread that culture throughout your organization just by doing that. So that's one of the big wellness things. The other one I really believe in working with some very large teams over the years is to be respectful of PTO. And in order to do that, you have to create a culture of coverage.
Coverage. Okay. Tell me more about that.
So a culture of coverage is a place where before, and I'm talking like big PTO, like a week, right? Like a real vacation. You are going somewhere, doesn't matter with who, but you're really looking to unplug and recharge. You have to do some prep for that. So it doesn't mean you get up until Friday afternoon and you slap on an out of office and hope the person's name you put in there will take care of things. Like it's actually outlining the things that are at risk. It's outlining who's got what. And that's also briefing your leader or leaders on here's the plan and here's who can take care of those things in my absence. When I think back to, in all the years and the vacations I've taken, there have been times where I've purposely chosen to dial into a meeting or to do something. But for the most part, if I've chosen to be unplugged, I'm able to stay unplugged, which is really helpful because then when I come back, I'm ready to go.
Well, let's talk about PTO and vacation, because I know a lot of people are taking vacation this summer, but we obviously all have email on our phone. We can't help but check it. But I also have, been on vacation with friends that are like, oh, I'm just going to do a little bit of work today because I'll be less stressed on Monday if I can just get some of this stuff done on vacation. Do you agree with that mentality, or what's your advice for people trying to actually relax on PTO?
I don't particularly agree with it, but I understand why people feel like that's necessary. Part of it is that urgency tends to live in the inbox right now, and it shouldn't. Urgency really should exist on our messaging apps. Because if something's truly urgent, then you should be getting an alert right away. Mm-hmm. Now, part of that is working with the people who are in your circle to say, if something's truly urgent, please get a hold of me. But if you batch process your email, let's say 4 times a day, right? That means you're literally checking email, every 2 hours? So if something needs a response in 2 hours or less, then it should probably come through another path. And
a Slack or a Teams or something.
Slack, Teams.
Call.
I remember those when we actually just picked up the phone and called someone. And it's interesting because folks who are used to checking email on vacation, that's exactly what they're doing. They're checking, they're not processing.
They're checking it with the same sense of urgency, but it doesn't actually have that urgency, or it shouldn't have that urgency.
Exactly. So are there times where there's something really urgent that does need to be taken care of during vacation? Yes. And that should be a push to you via one of those messaging systems versus you having to purposely go into your inbox, engage in that work mindset, and sort through all the vendor emails, all the updates, all the reports. Oh, and then there is something buried in there that you actually need to go dig into and take care of.
I think the other part of this is sometimes the people below you or other coworkers, it's really an opportunity for them to step up. One of my first big girl jobs, I was a sales assistant for this senior sales manager, and I'd only been there a little bit, not long, and she went out on maternity leave. But because I was working on her cases and her events, I should say, they were like, well, I guess it's yours now. And it forced me to just hit the ground running and do it. And then I remember when I went on vacation, my coordinator took over, and this was the first time I was taking a week and a half vacation. And I saw some of the emails and I was about to respond and then I didn't. And then I come back, she handled everything. Maybe she handled it a slightly different way than I would have, but it all got done. So I think there's a level of let the other people on your team, make those decisions for you, see what they end up coming up with, and allow them that opportunity.
It's spot on. I think there's an opportunity for development, and there's also just a culture of wanting to help others. I know I spent the last 2 years leading a group that was been transforming our airports and leading these huge hub construction projects and technology. And you would think during some of these really intense periods, it's well, no one just can take vacation. We'll just take vacation when we're done. It's no, that's not going to work. We really do need to make sure that folks are being taken care of. And we got to a point where, someone would say, hey, I've got something coming up in 4 weeks. I want to make sure we get a plan in place. And I would kind of lead the group through figuring that out. It got to a point by the end of last year where someone would just raise it and the team would just jump in. I wouldn't even have to do a thing. They literally, that culture of coverage had already taken hold, which was really important, which allowed folks to unplug. It's so interesting though with the unplug. Would you ever leave your phone on Do Not Disturb at night with emails on ping? No, because every time it would ping, you would get out of sleep and have to adjust it. That's kind of what it's like when you're on vacation and you have notifications on. You're literally disrupting your relaxation, your, unplugged time, especially if you're with others. Mm-hmm. Is that what you want their memory to be? Is oh, mom was super engaged until her phone went off.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I went on a retreat and there was no cell service. And I could tell the difference of just not even have any access, can't even access it if I wanted to.
Yeah. I always recommended something. It's a little controversial, I know, in some circles, but take your email app off your phone when you're on vacation. You can always get to it through the web. So if you do find yourself oh my gosh, I really need to just know what's going on, fine, you can do that. But to not get the little red bubble of, hey, there's something here for you. Mm-hmm. I think that's really powerful, and it keeps it out of sight, out of mind. So when you grab your phone to take a photo, you're not reminded that there are things waiting.
Right. If you're not strong enough to do that, you also can change the setting to where you just don't see the number and you don't get the push notification. You still have the app there if you ever really need to click it. But I think that's definitely really good advice. So what other tangible tips? I know you've given us a lot. So if that's all you have, that's quite enough. But do you have any other tangible tips people can use to not be quite as overwhelmed in the workplace? Anything with their emails or meetings? And I know we kind of covered a lot already, though.
We did. It's interesting because people are always wanting, like, is there just a couple tips? It's these tips that work together in concert that really make it work. And the book that I've been working on is actually coming out this fall. I'm very excited for it. Okay. It's called Next Week Will Be Better, 50 Tips for People Who Don't Have Enough Time. And it's kind of covers a lot of the things that we've talked about, but weaving those things all together so they work in a system. But I would say the number one thing you can do is every Friday is to give yourself a half an hour to prep for next week. And when I say prep for next week, there's a series of things you do.
Today's Friday, and I really thought you were going to say, like, go to happy hour. And I was like, I am.
Oh, well, that's good too. No, do that.
And no, spend 30 minutes prepping.
Yeah, spend the 30 minutes prepping. And that's about making sure that your schedule is set up to help you succeed next week. So what are the things that are due? Have you actually scheduled yourself time to work on the things that are due?
Right. Like time for actually doing tasks versus time for meetings.
Exactly. It's interesting because meetings come onto our calendar from others for the most part. I mean, a lot of us do set a lot of meetings, but we can control those and we can space those out. For instance, I like to put one-on-one meetings over the course of 2 days because that allows me to get into a mindset and to do kind of a rhythm of review of those agendas prior to those meetings versus having them completely spread throughout the week. Then you're kind of always in that mode. So that helps me do that. But as you're looking ahead to the next week, one is making sure I've got some focus time set aside in the morning so I can just enter my day, I can connect with my team, and I can really start to kind of dive into those projects that need my best brain power because I'm a morning person. And then the second thing is making sure my block to eat has not been booked over.
Smart. Okay. Yes. I know some friends that work right through lunch. Yes.
And it's okay to work through lunch as long as you are taking like 10 minutes for yourself to have a healthy meal and get a little bit of movement, which could be running up and down the stairs. But you've got to actually back away from your desk in order to reset for the afternoon. And the last piece is wrap up. You've got to have that chance to kind of flush your brain of all the things that you've been thinking of. And I actually do something that sounds silly, but I write myself a little note. Here's all the things I need to tackle tomorrow. Here are the things I've been thinking about. Yeah. And it's super rough hand. Sometimes I'll even write it in my focus time in the morning. So that way it's really fresh and I can just see it. And that prevents me from having the 3 a.m. wake up where I feel like I have to grab my phone and write myself notes.
Yeah. Yeah. Those are really good tips. So we have a little bit more time. I wanted to hear more about the Portland project you just finished because I guess back up. I called you because Harry Chima, Alaska, recommended you when I was looking for speakers for a conference, and all of my attendees just loved your sessions, and I'm sure the listeners are going to love this episode too. But that's how we know each other, and I called you kind of last minute. You're like, well, I've been up since 3 a.m. working on this Portland project, but I'll be there tomorrow. So thank you again for showing up. But tell us about this Portland project.
So the Portland transformation that's been happening is absolutely incredible. For anyone who is curious, did you know you can walk into any airport in the country? Like you don't even need to be flying, which is really interesting. Yeah, you just can't go through security. Yeah, they're public spaces. And Portland International Airport has been a project that's been underway for about 5 or 6 years to really create this incredible space that reflects the city in the Pacific Northwest. Alaska's role in that was obviously creating a brand new lobby experience that takes into account new technology that helps people get through that lobby in 5 minutes or less, which we love, right? We all want to have this travel experience where you have more consistency, you have less stress and less friction. And so I've been working with the team for the past 2 years to bring all those components together, and they've just done such an incredible job. The local team there is phenomenal. Like this is brand new, like using automated bag drops that take your luggage and they look at your ID and they look at your face, they make a match and off your bag goes. Like how cool is that?
Yeah. Wow. And so that just launched yesterday, I guess Thursday for people listening.
Wednesday morning at 3.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. Got it. Very cool. That's awesome. Well, thank you for sitting down with me. I know that people, if you're listening, if you're dealing with burnout, I've been through it. I left the corporate world for about 6 months. I almost feel like I'm a little too relaxed now because I've got a contract gig right now. And I'm like, everyone's stressed out. I'm like, guys, chill out, everything's fine. But I do remember when I first left, I turned in my computer and it'd been like a week or two. And I was like, why don't I feel relaxed? Like, I'm not working. What's going on? And I Googled it and it said burnout can take anywhere from 3 months to a year to recover. Wow. And there's such a, I think we throw the word burnout around pretty easily here. And there's such a range of experience on it, but you can get to like hospital level. And I'm not saying I was at hospital level, but, yeah, I think that it's just like a really serious thing. There's a podcast I really like called Fried. I'll link it in the show notes. but yeah, there's a lot to process with burnout, and there's your own boundaries, your people pleasing stuff. And I remember like after I left, I was trying to do something, just like sell a chair on Craigslist, but I was treating that with the same hyper urgency that I would a job. And I was like, well, I have to get back to this person, and this person asked, and I have to sell it by tomorrow. I'm like, no, I don't. No, I don't. Right. And so I think if you're listening, if you relate to that, happy to chat about it. And it does get better, but it does take some effort to kind of process some of that overwhelm and burnout feelings and do some practices. So hopefully these tips help everybody listening. Amber, thank you again for sitting down with me. And yeah, I guess hopefully we run into each other again.
Rachel, it's been a pleasure. I love getting to share this. I hope everyone has a chance to really invest in themselves by either trying some of these tips or to talk about if you do have a volume issue, like just make sure it's known and do it in a way that also speaks to all that you're accomplishing, because you are killing it out there if you're starting to feel this.
That's right. Well, that's a good place to end. Thank you. This has been The Weekly with production assistance from Nick Patry. If you liked what you heard, rate us and write a review on Apple Podcast or Spotify. We love listener feedback, so if you have any story suggestions, comments, or complaints, email us at info@theweeklyseattle.com. Make sure to check back next Sunday for the latest local business news. We'll see you next time.